Thanks for coming and spending some time with us, not only at the JNUC, hopefully it's been a great event so far, but here and talking about BYO iPhones and kind of looking at this session. Kind of a quick hand, how many people are actually deploying iPhones in a BYO type scenario today? Got a few? Cool, and anybody else just kind of looking at it, considering it, hoping? Cool, it's good, about 50-50. So what I think we're going to try to do as a part of this is hopefully give some ideas for strategy and ways to actually move forward. The whole title is Navigating a BYO iPhone Deployment or something really long like that, but I just shortened it to BYO because that's kind of what we're all talking about. My name is John Miller. I'm one of the product managers here with Jamf Software. I've been here for about 3 years. I know some familiar faces and folks that are kind of out in the crowd. But really just kind of what we want to talk about, give a quick introduction to iPhones in general and iPhones in the enterprise and what this means and how many we have and that type of thing. Not only what are the total number of devices that are sitting in my environment, but what are they running, right? And just kind of getting a feel for that. And that's going to help us build our toolkit for doing a BYO deployment, knowing what we have in our arsenal and ways that we can move forward and actually support this type of deployment. Then we're going to look at a couple different things. We'll look at what are the concerns that the end users have, what are the concerns that the administrators have, and then as always at the end, we'll talk about how to actually deploy and give some time for some questions at the end. So that's kind of the trajectory that we're on. We're going to try to do this in an hour. I like talking about this stuff, so if anybody wants to spend time after the Q&A or, we can be here all day and I can keep talking about this. So hopefully this will be exciting. The first stuff that we want to talk about, though, is just getting an idea for how many iPhones we have in our environment. What's the total number of devices? Is this a need? Is this a demand? If we're looking at, well, maybe I'll start allowing end users to bring their own devices in, but kind of getting some numbers and metrics around what number or how many devices we have. And the best way that I figured we could do this is actually look at what Apple's sold historically and just kind of see how that trajectory is moving forward. So it's going to be a little bit of a quiz. October 2011, Apple introduces the iPhone 4S. In the first 3 days, first weekend that was out, anybody have an idea for how many they sold just in the first 3 days? Close, yeah, 5 million. So 4 million iPhone 4Ss were sold in the first 3 days that they had, right? So that's a pretty big number. Again, just the first 3 days. There's way more than that out there today. Looking at the next one, September 2012 with the iPhone 5. Guesses here? 5 million. So close, yep. The last one, the 5S and the 5C. This one, we've seen 9 million. 9 million iPhone 5Ss and 5C in the first 3 days that it's open and been available. So we know that as Apple does their metrics and their how they come up with these numbers, this isn't Apple sold 2,500 to a store and those are sitting there waiting to get sold. This is actually 9 million iPhone 5S and 5C in the hands of an end user, activated and used in the first 3 days. So these are actual real numbers, real metrics for what we're seeing for those total number of devices. And so we see this growing demand of more and more and more end users are excited about this platform and wanting to use it. And so we kind of have to know, what are we going to do about that to help them use that within our enterprise organizations, whether this is commercial or education? What are we going to do to allow them to use their new devices within our organization and be more effective, be more productive, get the things that they need when they need it within our organizations? Another interesting thing, this is from Business Week. When we're looking at the total number of devices that we have, the blue graph on the upper right-hand side, my left, your right, that's 25% of the iPhones that exist today. Those are more or less in the hands of the organization and not necessarily BYO eligible. And so this is like kind of sort of what an organization buys a bunch of iPhones, they set them up, they configure them, and they give them to an end user. And an end user either doesn't take them home or they don't have full control. It's not necessarily their own phone that they're just using. The other 75%, you can see the split there. 45 of that is actually end users going to a carrier store or going to an electronics store or going to Apple and buying a phone, right? So 45% of those are actually bought by end users. And the other 30 are bought by organizations and given to the end users as a do what you want, this is your phone, we're just paying the bill type of model. That's kind of what we do here at Jamf Software. I have my phone. I don't pay for it, but I can do whatever I want with it, right? I can put my music, I can put my apps, I can use it for what I'm doing outside of the work function, and I also, am expected to do work on that as well. But we've got 75% of those new devices are basically BYO eligible or devices that may come onto our organization in that BYO type model. So we know that we've got a lot of them, right? That 4 million, 5 million, 9 million, and that's going up and up. We know that a lot of those, 3/4 of them, are eligible to be a BYO type device within our organizations. And so then we want to look at what's the toolkit that we have available, and basically what's the operating system that's there, right? With MDM and the capabilities that we have as an MDM provider, iOS 5 has some new capabilities over 4. 6 had more over 5, 7 has more over 6. And so how do we navigate that to say, hey, I know that my devices have this, that, or the other thing, and that means for me as an admin, I can actually deploy these types of models or deploy these types of settings. I'm going to knock that off. Deploy these types of settings onto the devices. And so we looked at OpenSignal, did a report. This is 6 months after iOS 6 was released. This is the segmentation of the operating system that they saw in the reports. And by segmentation of the operating system, you can kind of tell it's not that segmented. 94% of the devices that were available and sold were running iOS 6 within 6 months of iOS 6 being deployed. Apple is great at generating demand for the new features and functionality that are available in the operating system. And I think we all know this as mobile administrators or Mac administrators, that end users want those platforms as soon as they can. And that translates back to us for administrators, that a lot of folks are going to be updating and using this new platform. When we're looking at iOS 7, released a month and a half ago, I think 7 weeks this week, about 70%, 75% of devices have already updated to iOS 7 on iPhone. When we're looking at total number of devices, how many have actually updated? We've got about 200 million devices in the first week have updated to iOS 7. That's impressive. That's amazing. That kind of moves us towards that 94%, 95% adoption rate of this new platform. What that means for us as admins is that we know for the most part, I got a lot of iPhones coming. I got to figure out something to do with them, and they're mostly all going to be running iOS 7. So it kind of gives us this baseline of I know what I have available as far as a toolkit, what configuration settings, what deployment options I have, how can I take advantage of that to allow my end users to do their thing. And really what we're looking at is bridging that gap between what we as admins have for requirements, right? We have our security standards and our policies that we have to enforce and those types of things. But we also have our end users bringing their personally owned devices into our organization, and how do we help them do that? How do we not necessarily push away that desire, but say, hey, yeah, we can totally help you with that. We have these policies, and this is what it's going to do, but preserving the user experience that they want and kind of knowing where we have the end user concerns, the admin concerns, and really administrative concerns are the tactical things that our director levels want, right? They need to be able to report on that, show compliance in their meetings, that type of thing. And so we have to be able to bridge those two gaps together. We've got the end users themselves, and the end users care about a couple different things. Mostly, as an end user, I care about my own privacy, right? Keeping the corporate stuff corporate and the personal stuff personal. I care about getting access to the things that are important to me. Like I have my phone, and I want to get to, when I'm traveling or out and about or talking with folks, I want to be able to get to the resources that I need when I need them. And how do I get that stuff in my hands? And then we're trying to keep, this is my stuff and this is your stuff, and I just want to have that access to that without necessarily violating my own privacy in that. We've got the things that the admins are concerned about, right? And the admins themselves, they basically have to provide the tools, the apps, the content to the end users themselves in a way that's not necessarily generating high numbers of tickets or that sort of thing. We want to make that really easy for our end users themselves. We've got the things that they have to adhere to, like their corporate standards. And really, they have to take those corporate standards and those compliance issues and be able to report those out, right? And that's really for their directors, like we talked about, where they have to get that information out to the directors, be able to have them do their reporting and have them do their policy standards and that sort of thing. So those are kind of those descriptions of the gaps that we have and ways that we can fill those. And with the Casper Suite in iOS 7, we'll see that there's great ways that we can do both of that, right? We can actually talk about the end users and help them solve their needs, make this really easy for them in this BYO type model while we're adhering to our policies, adhering to our security standards, and that type of thing. When we're looking at the end users themselves, like we talked about, they just want it easy. They want what they want when they want it, and they want you separate from them, right? There's some compartmentalization that they want to be able to do. The first thing that we're trying to do as a part of this making it easy is the enrollment, right? There's not an app that gets downloaded. It's basically go to a website. They can authenticate with the credentials that they're used to authenticating with. There's some new features in iOS 7 that make that even more simple than it is already. At Jamf, what we do, you can see here, the enrollment URL is just your JSS address /enroll. When you're on the corporate network at Jamf, if you just put in M for mobile, it'll redirect you to our enrollment. And so that's just using HTTP redirection, some stuff in that if that's something that's helpful for you or your end users when they're bringing in their enrollment, they can just type that in. That'll hit a different server and redirect them to the enrollment URL, and this page draws, and they can authenticate and move forward. There's other integration that we've had to make this helpful for our end users. If you're using AeroHive, their access points and some of the Hive Manager stuff, there's integration there. But if you're not using their technology and kind of the integration that we have, we found that just using that M redirection really helps make that easy. Is anybody else doing this redirection stuff of URLs? Nobody. Is this helpful? Is that a good idea? Heads moving. Cool. Write that one down. We're going to do some URL redirection. The next thing, getting me what I want as an end user when I want it, this is really about self-service, right? So after I enroll my device in a BYO environment, I get that self-service web clip right on my device. And in that, I got all the apps, tools, content, the things that I need when I need them. So I don't have to get these things right away. Maybe I could. I can download them in my own time. I can get access to those corporate communications things. We're very big on ebooks within Jamf software. We love using ebooks as a way to communicate corporate things that are kind of more static, right? We can make these ebooks, deploy them out, and that's available to me as a resource right in self-service. The apps that I need, if we're using VPP and have those licenses, I can get those provided to me from my admin without having to pay money or anything like that. It's taken care of already for me. Makes it very simple for me. The other piece that we're looking at is that privacy concern, right? And so how do I not only keep myself separate, and I want to know that my admin's not watching over me all the time. In a BYO environment, this is one of the bigger concerns that we've seen and why we've decided to take the stance that the ability to track an end user is actually kind of a little bit violating of their privacy, especially in a BYO environment. And so having this technology do the providing of the tools and resources that they need without violating their privacy as far as their geolocation and some of that stuff, but we're also talking about the segregation of what's personal and what's private. So this is my iPhone, and so you can see I've got all my different stuff on there and different stuff that I use day to day. But within that, there's stuff that's basically Jamf-specific things that I do in my day-to-day, right? I'm a big-time Evernote user, big-time OmniFocus user, so I do that stuff to help me keep my notes for stuff that's happening at work and know what I have to work on. I've got my email and my calendar, events for things like this, and we use Voxer a lot. So just good examples of stuff where we have the tools provided to me, and I can get those whenever I need them, but those are completely separate from my personal stuff, right? All the stuff that's grayed out is stuff that I just use for my day-to-day outside of work. And so there's this separation between what's organizationally owned in both the device itself, what I can get access to, and what's my personal data. And that stuff is completely separate and compartmentalized. And so it makes it very easy for me as an end user to get the things that I need and keep these things separate. I can do that switch and that work-life balance and all that stuff to say, here's where my corporate work stuff is, and here's where my personal stuff is. And it's very simple. I don't have to do anything. And the best part about it is it's all using native things that are on the operating system, right? I can still get access to the full app store. I can use the tools in the organization environment that are in the ecosystem. And it's very native. It just works. It's really easy. So I really appreciate that about the way that we've been able to do this. When we're looking at the administrative side and really what you as administrators are focused on and kind of looking at, we're looking at a couple different things. The first is the apps and the content and those resources that we actually have. And this is kind of ways that we have the smart groups defined in the JSS to actually provide things like configuration profiles here, where we can take the groups of devices based on LDAP information, based on subnets, based on any of those criteria that we're collecting about the devices, dynamically create groups of those devices, and have that automatically set everything up. So when I have a new user in sales and they log in, enroll their device in a BYO deployment, they're automatically put into the sales group or into development or into instructional technology or into whatever that group might be. From there, they're going to get different set of configuration profiles. So here are the config profiles that might be available to me as an individual in development, right? And that's just going to show up in my self-service. Admins, you don't have to do anything. You do this work on the backside. It's set up once, and everything else is dynamic and handled by the JSS. We can do things like the content, like the apps themselves and the ebooks. And same idea, where these can be configured on demand. Like as an end user, I can say, I want that. Maybe I'm moving from our Minneapolis office to our Eau Claire office. The JSS is going to see that I'm in a different subnet, and I'm going to have a different AirPrint server, right? And so I'm going to get that through that configuration profile in iOS 7. So I'm going to get that, see that, no help desk ticket generated, no time off of the IT admin. It's just there. It just works. Very simple for the end users. We're able to kind of check that box and say, hey, we can get those things to our end users in a way that's effective and easy for them, and that's really important. Then we've got that reporting piece, right? And so this is just the JSS dashboard where we've got the different groups that we have. Maybe we just want to see how many individuals or how many devices fall into these groups that we have. And maybe we want to see, I've got this deployment of different configuration profiles. All green is all good, right? We're happy about that. So we can kind of take a look and say, hey, I got this quick view of reporting, and I know that everything's, for the most part, good on that. But if there's specific things that we want to look at, you can see like who in my environment is utilizing Find My Friends, right? It's still helpful and important to be able to help our end users track their device if it's lost or stolen. This is a big, important deal, and there's technology available there. So with iOS 7, we can just say, hey, we can report to see who's got Find My Friends enabled or disabled. And that way, if Jason loses his phone, he can come to IT and say, hey, I can't find my phone, but I have my iCloud account. And I can log into that. That can happen on any browser. And I can help, an end user can help the admin locate their phone and work with authorities or whatever the appropriate way to do that for your organization and actually do that. And we can report on that. Maybe this would even trigger something like an email to the end users to say, hey, we're not tracking that location. Apple's got technology that's going to help us find that phone if it gets lost or stolen. It looks like yours is off. You want to turn it on, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. But you can use that if you want to, and this is why that's going to help. We're able to help you track your phone in the event of something bad happening, right? We can look at more organization-specific stuff, not necessarily location of devices, but access to data and the things that are in that. And so we can see who's got access to different data, who's got these configuration profiles deployed, whether that's Wi-Fi or VPN or that sort of thing, and get access to that. Passcode compliance, at Jamf we have a soft policy. I'd say that, hey, put a passcode on your device, and I think there's, we've just got the typical, if it's not there, we'll force you to do it within 60 minutes, but if it is there, we don't have like it's got to be 38 characters and alphanumeric and blah-de-blah-de-blah. But we can report on that and just say, hey, here's all this information. We have an idea and kind of have our finger on what the devices in our environment have on them, how they're set up, what that configuration and deployment looks like, so that we just have an idea to pass on to the directors for the conversations that they have and the compliance reporting that we're responsible to deliver on that side. Very simple to do. All this stuff is dynamic. We just set up a few config profiles, set up this reporting on the deployment, and we're able to look at that. Data in transit is the other one. So, yeah, I did this talk a couple weeks ago, last week. Feels like a lot longer ago, and not a lot of people know who this is. So really what enterprise organizations care about when we're talking about a BYO environment is they care about data, right? And that's, okay. So it's not necessarily, it's not that they don't care, as us as admins, it's not that we don't care about other things, it's that really we have to protect the data. We have to be worried about the data that's sitting on the device, right? Who has access to that data, how that data moves around and where that's going to go, and then how we know that that data is secure when an end user is accessing it. So we're talking about the access to the data at rest that sits on the device, and that data in transit, and how we protect those three things. And so with iOS 7, all those things we can take care of natively. We can utilize the different configuration profiles and options that are there. When we're looking at the data, the access to that data, this is the DeYoung Museum in San Francisco. I just like it because it looks very ominous and like, you know, a jail. But it's beautiful architecture if you've never been there. It's really about how do we protect the access to that data? How do we secure the things that are organizational and keep those separate and kind of compartmentalized and protect who can get to that data? And with iOS 7, there's new technology available. I think Nick mentioned this in a talk earlier, SSO, when we were talking about the managed apps earlier in the week. And SSO is single sign-on, and really what this helps us do is protect the access to that data. So we can make a configuration profile, deploy that to our iOS 7 devices, and natively, the app developers don't have to do a lot of work. This is on an operating system level, where we can deploy that and say, hey, these apps utilize this SSO payload so that we can protect the access to that data. What's helpful about this as an administrator, so I've got a 9-month-old daughter. She loves my iPad, right? She just plays around with it. She has no idea what's happening, but it doesn't matter. It's just colors and whatever. It's funny if she sends an email to all Jamf, right? That's kind of ha ha ha. Everybody's like, hey, my kid sent an email. It's not funny if she gets onto Box and deletes a corporate file, right? I don't know if anybody's been in this world, but this is stuff that has happened where, you know, you can kind of get the funny stuff, but like, oops, yeah, that's kind of neat. The not so funny stuff, like files are accidentally deleted when someone was inadvertently playing with the device and didn't know what they were doing. And it's even less funny when that device gets into the hands of, you know, inappropriate end users for all intents and purposes, and somebody, you know, the device gets lost, and somebody can actually access that. It's not necessarily deleting it, it's that they can read it. And with the SSO payload, we can secure that access to that data and have a separate piece of wrapping around the data itself to say, hey, when we remove that, that device can't authenticate to our services. And so when Box.com tries to launch and it uses this SSO payload to get into that data, that payload's not there, and that device can't access that data. So we can secure who has access to that data separate from the requirement of a passcode on the device and kind of have this 2-layer of security. Very simple to do. We just define that payload, say, hey, this is the SSO stuff. We define our Kerberos environment. That all authenticates, gets put down to the device, and like I said, we can report on that on the backside as well. Very simple to do that deployment. The next one we're talking about is the access. We got the access to the data, now it's the data at rest. And there's kind of two separate pieces, that data at rest, and the security around data at rest becomes important. The first one is when we're looking at where does that data get backed up. This is kind of one of the things that not a lot of end users actually understand where the data goes. And so we can say, hey, when you have an app, by default, it's backing up to iCloud. You plug it into your iTunes. You know, iTunes sees it when you plug it in. When you charge it, if you use your machine to do that, it backs up data there. Or if you have the Wi-Fi syncing enabled, it'll back up data over that. So your devices could be backing up without you even knowing it. And you kind of get this like perception of a wild, wild west. Where's my data going? And so with iOS 7, we're able to actually stop and protect that. And we have some things with iOS 6 and 5 as well to be able to say, hey, we can protect where that data gets backed up to, and that data at rest, it's encrypted on the device, so we're not necessarily worried about someone SSHing to our phone and blah-de-blah and getting into that. But it's more about where does that data move to, and are those locations secure and managed, right, by our organization, and how do we make sure that that happens? And so again, kind of using the config profiles that are there, we can do backup management, I guess you can say, based on a global level to say, hey, this device can't back up anything to iCloud, or we're not going to let this plug into an iTunes account and actually back up its data there. Or if we wanted to keep this separate and say every managed app, everything that's corporate and organization owned, they can't back up that stuff to unmanaged locations like a personal iTunes or iCloud, or even just a specific app, right? Like we have Box, and we use Box for everything. We know that that security is there, and the app data that might sit there, that's basically more access to that app data than it is data sitting within the app bundle on the device, and I don't necessarily care if any of that you know, configuration for Box gets backed up. So I can say Box doesn't need to be backed up, but Keynote, which has a lot of confidential stuff and corporately owned data that sits on my iPad, that I don't want to back up. And so we can say everything can't back up. We can go one step lower and just say only organization apps don't back up, or individual organization apps don't back up. And they don't back up to iTunes, they don't back up to iCloud, whatever that configuration is that's appropriate for your organization, you can do that using the configuration options that we have. So this is just kind of backing up individual apps like Dropbox, that sort of thing, kind of going through that process. Questions about access to data, data at rest, anything there? Good? Yeah. Only allow backups. Oh, okay, so like disabling PhotoStream and or forcing the enabling of PhotoStream? So the options that we can configure from an MDM perspective, so the question is, we can say this can't back up, but can we flip that and say this has to back up and kind of force that back up? Most of the options that are in the MDM spec are on or off. And so if we deploy the on, it will do the on. And if we deploy the off, it'll do the off. So the hesitation in my voice is that not every single configuration, package, app, whatever, has these options, but some of that stuff does. So helpful? Cool. Any other questions before we go on? I realized I was talking like a lot, and we can, okay. The last piece that we're looking at is data in transit and the access when an end user is mobile and they're out and about kind of doing their thing and they're accessing corporate data. How do we secure that? And the current technology, pre-iOS 7 and kind of the stuff that's there, it's all about VPN. And we have the ability with VPN to actually configure how that access or how that data is secured, like turn on SSL, turn on whatever encryption we want, turn on credentials, and those types of things are handled by VPN. We could easily create that, deploy that down to the devices, and then the device could get access to that VPN, authenticate, and they're in. The hard part about it was I couldn't, as an admin, force my end users to turn on VPN. I could in a way that, if you're not on the corporate network, you don't get access to this, that, or the other thing. But I couldn't just say, hey, when this stuff happens, when an end user wants to get access to this thing using this app, use VPN. And the rest of the time, don't, right? The hard part about VPN previously kind of snuck into that end user privacy standpoint where all the traffic happened over VPN. And so if end users were concerned about, hey, my data is now going through the corporate network when I'm checking my Facebook at home at, whatever, and if that's something that they're concerned about, we didn't necessarily have a great answer. And with iOS 7, that answer is much different, where we can configure a per-app VPN for either apps themselves or actual URLs that an end user might browse to. So we have a public-facing wiki that we can go to. We have all the apps that we have internally at Jamf. And as an admin, I can enable per-app VPN for those separate from my general VPN and say, hey, this is going to be my VPN connection for my specific app, right? And so this is just an example for Pages. I'm going to define that VPN information. I'm going to put in just about the same type of stuff that we typically do for a VPN, right? The server, the credentials, the realm if we have it, that sort of information. And then I take that payload and I actually associate it with the app itself in our app catalog in the JSS. So down here at the bottom, there's a per-app VPN mapping. And so I define my VPN payloads that I have. If it's one payload for every single app, if it's different payloads for the different apps that we have, whatever's the most appropriate for you. Typically, we go with the modular route of one VPN payload named appropriately per app just for reporting purposes, just to be able to say, this person's got Pages VPN, but not this one, and so we have to be able to remediate that instead of any time something happens, we have to clobber it, every single one. It just kind of makes it a little bit easier and granular reporting that we can do around that. Bless you. So we define the VPN payload. We define that app. If it's already defined, we just put that payload into that app and say, hey, this is the VPN connection that I want you to use. And after that, when that gets deployed down to the device, and this is just showing that we can do it for the browser as well, to say here are the specific Safari domains that I want the VPN to actually initiate from. And when that app is launched, or when that URL is visited or browsed to, or whatever the appropriate verb is, it just kicks off that VPN connection. So you've got the SSL, you got the credentials there. The end user may not even know that it happens. They could see the VPN information on the top, right, to say, hey, this actually executed the VPN and I'm connected. But it's a seamless transition from non-VPN to VPN, and only for the things that are organizational. And so we can secure the data as those end users are accessing it to say, this is going to happen over SSL, this is going to happen over a VPN, this is all logged in on our backside with what we have in VPN. But all that happens separate from the stuff that's personal for our end users. And our end users, we're not able to deploy that over the top of what's an end user. And so we can say to our end users, hey, the stuff that's yours is yours, and I can't even get to it. The stuff that we care about, this is what that is. Put that in acceptable use policy or whatever might be appropriate for you. But this is what we can get to, and this is what we have to be worried about. And please, bring your iPhone into the environment. We get access to this stuff for you, and know that those things are separate. Make sense? Cool. So kind of going back over the whole thing, a lot of iPhones are coming in, right? We've got a whole bunch of iPhones, and for the most part, based off this graph, we know that they're mostly all going to be running iOS 7 very soon. We're already about 70%. That's probably going to keep climbing and probably get closer to this 94% as more and more end users actually go through the update process. I've seen a couple people running iOS 6 here, which I was a little bit surprised. I figured, as the IT admins, we'd be moving to iOS 7 as quickly as we could. But a lot of folks are going to be running this. So we know that we got a bunch of devices. We know the toolkit that we have. We know what we care about with basically just being able to secure the data, report on that, and get our end users what they need. And we have that functionality all available through the Casper Suite. It's really helpful for us to be able to do that and powerful to do this in a way that's non-violating of our end user privacy. And so as you're kind of looking at how do I do this deployment, what's the first steps that I can take, have a chat with your end users and say, hey, here's what we're going to be able to do. Maybe this isn't an email or, like I said, user acceptance type stuff, and just say, hey, here's what we can do, here's what we're going to be able to do. This stuff is separate, this stuff is included, it's all compartmentalized. It's going to allow you as an admin to actually embrace these and let the users use their devices within your organization, and you can do this compartmentalization. And if something were to happen, something bad, you can wipe the corporate data, but not the personal data. You can remove access to corporate things, but only personal things, and not the personal things. You can work with your end users to help them find their devices if it gets lost without violating the privacy on the backside. It's a much more powerful story to be able to have these conversations with the end users than just be able to say, we're going to get everything you got all the time, and we're going to track you all day long. I think a lot of people are really excited about the ways that we can do this, and we're excited to hear how this helps in your environments as well. Any questions or stuff? This is kind of the end, so we've got some time, 30 minutes. Questions? Yes? Okay.
Do you see any technical or monetary advantage to having Casper managed iPhones and AirWatch managed devices?
Yeah, so the question is basically in a split environment where we've got cross-platform for mobile devices, where we have 90% iOS and 10% Android, are there technical reasons or monetary reasons why we might want to use one solution for the iOS side and another solution for the Android side? I think most of that depends on the environment that you're working in. A lot of the people that we see are, as mobile device administrator becomes a thing and is actually something that people are focusing on, we're seeing compartmentalization happen where the mobile team is actually they're coming out of the Mac side. They're doing the mobile stuff as well and handling that. And so most of the environments that I get to see into and work with, they actually do have that separation. And a lot of the Android stuff goes to the Windows side, or however they might happen. But it basically I think people still have this idea of like, just let the Apple people do the Apple stuff. And we have the ways to do that, I think, a lot better than some of the other solutions that are there. So monetary, I don't know what, that makes sense within your environments and kind of the other platforms that you're supporting. But we are seeing that split, kind of how SCCM is a great tool for Windows. Casper Suite's the great tool for the Mac side and the iOS side. And kind of keeping that same type of idea, I think, bridges very easily into the mobile side. Other questions? Yeah? Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, when we're looking at making it easy for end users and doing a URL redirect, is there a best practice or a standard for what that redirect is? And does that have implications in the SSL cert that it's actually trusted by the device when we go through the enrollment process? First part, best practice. I think it's what's in your DNS records, what can you actually use, and what's available. For us, that was just M because it's one letter, and our QA department enrolls devices a lot. And so that was just one letter, go, and everybody's in. So as far as the best practice, like if that's like the /enroll works for iOS and OS X, and so you can do a BYO for both the Mac platform and the iOS platforms. And so if that's Apple, and that just, if you're on an Apple device, put Apple in your URL, you're going to get to the right place and you can enroll. You can do that sort of thing. I think there's not necessarily a defined best practice for how to do it. If you got good ideas, I'd say put them on Jamf Nation and kind of share some of the stuff around that. As far as the implications on the SSL, it's kind of a no worries type of thing. So once how I've set it up is it's an Apache web server that's actually running and not within Tomcat that's running the JSS. And so it's just gonna say, oh, I got, DNS is gonna point me to that, say I got a request to this, oh, pass me to this URL, and then everything is happening as if I just browse straight to that URL. So the SSL cert is fine. Way in the back.
When you were talking about the corporate apps that you were using on your phone,
Yeah.
They were intermixed with all your personal apps.
Yep.
Is there a way to create a page that's just corporate apps so they're segregated from the personal?
Yeah, so the question is, when we were looking at the screenshots on my phone, there's, my stuff is kind of separated out through the different pages. Is there a way that we can put all that together? And my assumption is, the question is, can we do that from a corporate level and say, all these apps go to this page? Right now, we can't force anything that's on the springboard. From an MDM perspective, we can't say these apps all go to this page. If an end user deploys a bunch of apps at once, they just kind of go to the end. So that might be some of it, but it's not we can't create a new page, dump all the corporate stuff there, and go from there. If that's something that opens up, we'd absolutely be interested in taking a look at some of that stuff. Yeah. Same for folders, yeah. So the question, is it the same idea? Can we manage folders and what's in those and that type of thing? The answer is no, we can't today. Something over here, yeah.
On your automatic enrollment, I see you just set them log in. Do you have a separate user predefined in Jamf for each person?
Yeah, so the question is, how do we do authentication to the enrollment? Is that a separate user that sits there, and how do we do that? Couple different ways we can do it. We can define all those users if we want and have those in the JSS. There's a enrollment-only option for the there's the roles in the JSS for what a user might be, and enrollment is one of those. So we can create all those if we want, or if we have an LDAP environment, we can integrate with that. Most places that we work with, there's an LDAP environment standing, and so we can just say, hey, these groups get enrollment only, these individuals do, and you can set your permissions based on their LDAP status. Does that help?
Yeah, and then that's how you deploy the apps they need.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So the how we deploy apps based on LDAP, we have this integration with what's there, and so we can do that for both authentication to say these individual groups are going to get this access. Like I think one of the best practice things that we've kind of defined and helped push forward is if you have an IT group within your LDAP, give that IT group the privilege that they need in the JSS for the things that they have. And then if you have a user change roles or leave the organization or new people join the organization, just change your LDAP. And that's going to reflect all those changes that you need on the JSS side. So you've got that permission side, but then how do we do the other way where we're actually deploying apps and that sort of thing? And with the LDAP integration, we can read those groups in and say these different groups get these different stuff, right? Apps, content, whatever that might be. And so again, when a user joins a different group or this changes on the LDAP side, that's automatically reflected immediately on the JSS side. And so they would get that stuff that's appropriate for the group that they're in at the time. Make sense? Cool. Yeah, in the back again.
Can you talk more about how many end users when we're going to put the corporate apps on their stuff? How do you tell them that? And you feel comfortable about that?
Yeah, so the question is, how do we scratch the back of our end users when we're saying, hey, bring your devices in, and these are the things that are going to happen on your device, and kind of how do we define that? The best thing that we've seen is transparency, to say these are the exact things that it's going to happen, and kind of communicating this is the behavior change you're going to see on your device. Like, hey, you're going to get a VPN thing that's going to initiate when you launch these apps or go to these things, or you're going to get asked to authenticate with your credentials to LDAP when, or maybe not say that, but your normal credentials when you go to these things, and just kind of letting them know behavioral change things that's going to happen and what that's going to do for them. Like if we, from an admin perspective, the times that I've been most helpful for my end users is when we define and communicate the context around why this stuff matters for them, whether that's in an email that gets sent out or a PDF that's in self-service, or whatever the best way to do this. Commercial is different from education. Education we've seen work with parents and say, as a part of conferences and student-teacher get-togethers and that type of thing, work with those parents to say, hey, if your students are bringing their BYO iPad into the organization to use as a part of their learning tool, this is what's going to happen. Communicating with parents is very helpful. Is anybody education in here? My couple? Yeah. So communicating with the parents is very helpful, especially in a BYO type scenario. They're the people that care about the privacy of their students, right? In the enterprise organization, maybe that's a part of the HR benefits package, enrollment, onboarding, that type of stuff. But just being transparent, I think, is the best way to go through. Does anybody else have ways that they've been effective in communicating what's going to happen? Silence.
Because I hear a lot of concerns about the big brother.
Yep.
You're going to know where I get it. Oh, you're going to know what I.
Yep.
You're going to know what I looked at.
Yeah. Somebody I was chatting with yesterday, they actually show their JSS and give read privileges to end users to go into the JSS and see what they can see, right? And so they just say, hey, here's everything that I know about you, and I just know what apps are there, how you're complying to corporate standards for stuff that we've talked about and stuff that's in there, but I don't have your specific geolocation when you're home. It's not something I can do, and kind of showing some of that in there. I don't know if that's something you can do in your organization, but it's an idea. Yeah.
So with the advent of the iOS 7 and managing for app VPN and all these different settings that we now have,
Yep.
what if the end user already has that app?
Yeah. So the question is, if an end user has an app already, like maybe we're already through a BYO deployment of sorts, or the end user already has that stuff, how does that change some of the stuff that we've already talked about? It's tough. That's kind of the short answer. Again, it's not about, we don't even get to the point of user experience where it's tough. It's data. Like if I've got pages on my device and it's full of a bunch of documents that I wrote, and now we want to start using per-app VPN and some of that stuff, working with the end user to bring that data out, make sure that's secure. At the end of the day, we have to redeploy that app. If it's an unmanaged app, we have to redeploy it. If it's already managed, we can get some things around that to do some of the VPN pieces on that. But if it's an unmanaged app, it's got to come off and get reinstalled. With some of the new changes that are happening with the licensing, it might initiate a redeployment of some apps as well on that side, and some of the technology that's coming from Apple. You can read between the lines as appropriate there. And so maybe that's going to be a little bit easier. You can kind of pair those two efforts together to say, hey, we're going to do these things. We're going to utilize some new technology that we're able to take advantage of. And as a part of that, we're going to change how this works here and explain the why. I think that'd be helpful. But from a data backing up and getting it to a spot and some of that stuff, not much from an MDM standpoint that we can help with on that. It's tough. Other thoughts, other questions? Yeah. Question one, do we allow or block Snapchat? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think we have any specific blocking of apps.
Related to that, is it possible to prompt like a little help message that says, although this is personally owned device, and you're allowed to do whatever you want on it, just be aware that what you want on the internet forever is representing an employee of our organization?
Yeah, so kind of getting into the question is, are there ways to prompt users or kind of communicate what the internet means, and that once it's on the internet, it's always on the internet, and how that might change their behavior with the device and ways that we can message. I think there's different ways to message that in an effective way, whether that's a prompt on the device, home, web clip that sits on the device, a part of the end user policy. We have, we had to like sign like, hey, this is acceptable use, and we're all techie folks for the most part, and so we kind of get it, but not everyone's a software company, and so there's some changes in that. I think over communicate, some of that stuff. What's your, I mean, are you education? Interesting, cool. Yeah, it's kind of tough. Yeah. Anybody else have other ways that they can help with that other than just over communicate? You guys are quiet.
You can always change the message in the enrollment.
Yeah, that's a good thought.
If you want to kind of expound on it there, when they go to tap the profile, you could have specific language related to that. Like, you install this, we're going to, please know that you represent your
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
blah, blah, blah. Could you route it to the VPN and have the VPN block it?
You could if it's, kind of a couple parts, I'll get to that. So when you enroll a device, there's a message that you can prompt and say, hey, this is, us organization, this is what's gonna happen, blah, blah, blah. Whatever is a customizable, helpful message for your end users. You can put something in there. You can put something in a link to acceptable use or whatever's helpful in that, and that might be one of the ways that you can over communicate. So that's kind of, I don't have a screenshot of it, but you authenticate, you say, deploy this profile, and as a part of that enrollment process, there's that text that you can display. So that can be a part of that. Kind of getting to, can we VPN some of that information back? Anything that's a managed app, we can do the VPN, per app VPN, and force that to be on. And so maybe a way to help combat that is to provide Snapchat or whatever the thing is with a per app VPN. Say, hey, you want to use it? Here it is. Here's acceptable use. If there's a way to actually utilize that technology in a positive way in your environment, like Voxer's one that I showed, and it's just more like, a phone is a walkie-talkie, but let's just get a walkie-talkie because that'd be kind of silly. So that's why I have it. But if that, a similar tool where, if we can provide that and then put some controls around that for whatever reasons we need to, and say, here's great ways to use this tool, because I think there's value in that app, right? It's just kind of been taken to weird places. So there's value there. Let's define that, help them use that as something helpful, and then, that kind of gets us the auditing on the backside to be able to say, hey, maybe not do that. That type of thing. Other questions? Yeah.
So going back to the scenario, like let's say cases, user already has pages, and your organization's already in pages. How do you keep the users at rest data? Let's say they have 10 documents.
Yep.
And now you're managing the app, and when they launch the app, it's establishing the VPN connection.
Yep.
How do you sandbox the users at rest data and the company's at rest documentation? Is there a way to split it, like a split tunnel? I mean, is there a way to differentiate? Because it's not everything's going to be in that environment that every time you go to launch pages, whether it's a corporate
Yep.
document or a personal document, it's going to establish that VPN connection. So
Yep.
where do we granularly adjust that?
So the question is, we talked about how we can provide compartmentalization per app, but for end users with existing apps, can we provide another layer in the app itself to say this is corporate stuff and this is personal stuff, and the corporate stuff is going to use the VPN and the personal is not. Today we can't. Providing that, everything is based on a per app level, and then if that granularity comes on a specific app content and splitting some stuff there, I think that stuff we'll definitely take advantage of and be able to say, hey, this is personal stuff and this is corporate stuff. But for the most part, today we're not able to on that separation. Yeah.
But the per app VPN for pages specifically, though, is to what, like the web dev
Yeah.
SharePoint that you've got, right? So the data is still being saved in directions.
Yep.
Your personal stuff go iCloud, corporate stuff you save your web app or your per app VPN. So it's
True. Yeah, so kind of the more of just kind of a feedback than a question, but so dependent on the app, looking at how that data is used, specific to pages, my personal stuff that sits in pages, so I'll back up even a step. Per app VPN is for only things that connect to the internet, right? So it's only stuff that you require an internet connection, and so it'll execute that when it needs it. When we're looking at pages, my personal stuff, I'm not saving that to the corporate share, right? It's not an internet-dependent app, right? I can have my personal stuff sit there. But one of the ways that I might use Pages in a corporate environment that I would need that internet connection is when I want to save my data to a WebDAV or to a share that we have that Pages can export to. And so when that happens, that would initiate that per app VPN. The corporate data part is there, it's secured, and that's done for us. So that's a great kind of in between the lines. It's still, not full compartmentalization, but looking at the apps themselves and kind of thinking through how is this going to be used and is this going to help me protect the data in transit and the access to that data, separation from the user and the organization. Yeah.
Go back on that. Okay, so another example, box.
Yep.
Box, you have documents.
Yep.
That's going on the internet.
Yeah. Yeah.
You deployed that app as managed because you want to do the VPN, you want to secure the information. Now the user, if you turn on prevent backing up of this data, the user plugs in their phone or wants to do a sync.
Yep.
Now the user can't back up your data. So how do you,
Yep. Yep.
how do you do that? Now the user, is in compliance and using the technology and using it.
Yep.
Secure corporate data, but they're using personal stuff as well. How do you?
Yep.
How do you solve the both worlds?
Yeah, so the question is with apps that are basically windows to online stuff, right? Like Box, right? So Box is a container that's just going to get you to your portal of files. And how do we do that type of separation between the two with the per app VPN connection, some of the technology that's there? That's one of the places where it's not such a definable spot, right? With Box, when I log in with my Jamf account, or I have a personal Box as well, when I log in with that, both of those would happen over the per app VPN, and those same backup stuff to back up my data to iTunes or iCloud, that would affect both states, or both authentication pieces for all intents and purposes. So same thing on that side. I mean, are we actually backing up Box data personally, or are we letting Box do Box's backup and we just access that? And how that's used and that type of thing kind of creates a little difference in how that might get deployed. Until they rewrite the app. Yep. Yep, totally. Yeah, Evernote's a good example. Kind of until they rewrite the app, and app developers are able to take advantage of some of this stuff. When we're looking at managed apps and some of the stuff that was there, app configuration, some of this with per app VPN and the stuff that's here, I think app developers have a lot of work to be able to take advantage of this, and so that's going to catch up where the adoption of the platform is going to happen, and then they're going to get the app developers, they're going to be able to take advantage of a lot of this stuff, and we can do a lot of that, right? Where, like we talked about, I think it was Monday when Nick had managed apps and the conversations that were there about how do we do app configuration, and a lot of his answers were, well, you got to wait for the app developers to be able to get this stuff there. I think we're going to see very similar stuff on this. Separation between those two, whether that's a check mark to say this is or is not personal to initiate or not, that type of thing. But a lot of this stuff today we can take advantage of because it's at an operating system level, right? And so the app developers don't have to do anything. We can just deploy this and take advantage of the new technology right away. Really helpful, I think, for most folks. We don't have to wait for the app developers to secure our data. We can do that today. Other questions, other thoughts? What time we got? 7 minutes. I can stay here if anybody else wants. Oh, we got one in the back. We got a few. Okay.
In education, we have a lot of people who are in one institution for a semester, then over in another, and then going back again.
Yep.
I'm wondering if you see any special recommendations you have for customers who go back and forth and/or just offboarding in general.
So the question is, how can we handle user state changes, I guess is a weird way of saying it, but when a user is in one group for a short period of time and then they move to another. So an education example is I'm in this term, these classes, and I move to another. And then I move to another, maybe back and that type of thing. Or in commercial organizations, we do this as developers where we use the Casper suite to actually help us develop iOS apps, right? So the Casper Focus, we have stuff that's there that we can deploy to our shares, but different developers fall in and out of doing work on that, and so it does a lot of auto configuration. I think there's stuff that we can do specific to smart groups in ways that we can do a lot of that dynamic aspect of it, and it may be a little bit longer conversation that we can have afterwards or whatever makes sense. Yeah.
Just clarification.
Okay.
I'm also talking about in education, we may have someone coming from one
Yeah, so kind of clarification on the example. I'm an educator in one college or one university. I've got a device that's enrolled to one JSS with a bunch of stuff on it, apps and content and access and blah, blah, blah. Then I move to a different one, and I'd have to re-enroll into that one, right? My phone, my BYO, but kind of re-enrolling in what's that user state, what's going to happen on that device when they move. When you unenroll and re-enroll, managed content and managed apps get removed from the device. And then moving into the new space, they can get redeployed. But again, kind of like what we were talking about earlier, that's where user data gets a little weird and kind of helping the user know and help them back that data up as they go through the enrollment. The providing the content, that part's relatively dynamic and pretty simple. But where it gets hairy is when we've got personal data that sits in pages in one organization. We remove that app and then redeploy it here. And that content may not be there. And some of that may be intended, right? Personal content, not intended, but we don't want this organization content to be available when they move to this place and vice versa. And so working with those users to help figure out a way to back that data up, we can work on that. Other thoughts, questions? Yes? Yep. Yeah, so the question is when we do the unenrollment or the user moves to a different organization, that type of thing, how can we handle that? I think that depends on the type of device, right? Like not iPad, iPhone, but is this device going to stay here or not? We have the granularity to say, I'm going to wipe the whole device and just bring it back to activation screen. Maybe not the best idea. Personal stuff, yeah, great question. So in the JSS, there's an unmanaged button, right? We can hit that for a device, and that will remove management and the management data. And so this idea of being able to remove the corporate stuff without removing the personal stuff, we can remove the access to the data that's organizational. We can remove the VPN, Wi-Fi, those types of payloads, email, and we can remove the apps themselves that the organization deployed. And kind of keep that separation. Again, kind of going back to the example that you brought up where it gets a little hairy when I have personal data in Pages that's a corporate-owned app and they wipe that, like maybe working with those end users as a part of the departure process or moving process. Sometimes, maybe they don't want to work with you, in some of that stuff, but you have the granularity to say, all this corporate stuff is going to go away, all this personal stuff is going to stay here. It's your device, and we're not going to touch any of the apps that are there, but kind of keeping that data in mind. Help? Yep, yeah. So the reporting would happen on the backside to say this device doesn't have this profiles, doesn't have these payloads, doesn't have these apps, whatever might happen. It's an unmanaged device that's out of our managed space. I can't do anything with it. I just see that I had it at one time. Yeah? Can a device be enrolled in multiple organizations simultaneously? From an MDM perspective, no. One MDM payload per device. And so I can only be enrolled into one JSS at a time. There's some other stuff in there that we can talk about later for some of the other services and stuff that's there, but that's how that plays out. We've got time for more questions, and I can stay up here and talk. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that we have a bunch of documentation that we're delivering and we'll have available on Jamf Nation under this session for this, basically this stuff in text in a referenceable format. So we'll have the videos, all that stuff will be there. We'll have the documentation as well, kind of as I'd say it's a one sheet, but it's three. And so a 3-sheet of this type of information for ways that you can take advantage and actually implement these types of solutions. So that'll be available if anyone wants to dart, they can. Yeah. How soon will all that stuff be uploaded? The video is going to be the longest part. We've got a small video crew of like 2, and they've got all the sessions to cut and edit and kind of get that up. So the newsroom's been updated every night. So every night they've gotten all the sessions up in the newsroom and some information there. jamfsoftware.com/news, which redirects the latest. Either one works for you. But that's got some information there. The presentations, the actual keynote slides, those should all be on Jamf Nation relatively soon. But video and stuff like that, a little bit of leeway, and we'll get that up as soon as we can. Other thoughts, questions? Is this helpful? Let's start there. Helpful? Cool, awesome. Well, I'll be up here. If anyone else wants to talk, spend some time chit-chatting, happy to do it. Thank you for spending time with me and kind of learning about this. Hopefully you guys can do something and kind of move on from here. So.